We live our lives by the calendar. The date on our phone, the year printed on a coin, the historical events we learn in school, they all operate on a shared, universal timeline. It is a system of order, a grand clockwork mechanism that allows us to record our past, structure our present, and plan for our future. We accept the current year as an unshakable fact, a number that has been steadily ticking upwards, day by day, century by century, since a designated point zero. It is the most fundamental framework of our entire civilization. But what if that framework is built on a lie? What if the year we all agree upon is wrong? Not just off by a few days due to some minor miscalculation, but wrong on a scale so vast it is almost impossible to comprehend. What if a massive, 300-year chunk of human history, a period we have studied and written about, simply never happened? What if it was all a forgery, a ghost story inserted into our timeline to deceive the future? This is the audacious, mind-bending claim at the heart of one of history's most fascinating and controversial theories, the phantom time hypothesis. Put forward in the 1990s, the hypothesis doesn't just question a historical event, it questions history itself. It argues that a period of 297 years in the early Middle Ages, specifically the years between AD 614 and AD 911, is a complete fabrication. According to the theory, these 3 centuries were artificially inserted into our calendar. This means that every event, every document, and every person we associate with this era is either a work of fiction or has been displaced from their correct point in time. The implications of this are staggering. If the phantom time hypothesis were true, it would mean that you are not living in the 21st century. By subtracting the 297 phantom years, our current year would actually be somewhere in the mid-1700s. It would mean that the legendary Holy Roman Emperor Charlemagne, one of the most important figures in European history, may have been a complete invention, a literary creation designed to fill the void of a fabricated timeline. It would mean that entire generations of people, the rise and fall of kingdoms, the development of art and architecture, all of it is a historical mirage. It sounds like the plot of a science fiction novel, a conspiracy on a scale so grand it dwarfs any other. Who could possibly pull off such a deception? How could you forge 300 years of history across an entire continent? And more importantly, why would you even want to? The theory proposes an answer, a conspiracy of power, orchestrated by some of the most influential figures of the medieval world, all to serve their own ambitious goals. In this hypothesis file, we are opening the archives on this incredible theory. We will examine the so-called evidence presented by its creators, a strange anomaly hidden within our calendar and supposed gaps in the historical and archaeological record. We will investigate the alleged conspirators and their motives. And then, we will turn to the meticulous work of mainstream historians and scientists to see if this audacious claim holds up under scrutiny. Is it possible that we have been living a lie for over 1,000 years? The file is now open. A conspiracy of this magnitude, a forgery that rewrites 3 centuries of history, would require meticulous planning, immense power, and a powerful motive. It is not a claim to be made lightly. The modern architect of this theory is Herbert Illig, a German publisher and author who, in the early 1990s, began publishing a series of books and articles outlining what he believed to be the greatest deception in human history. Illig was convinced he had found a fundamental flaw in our timeline, and he set out to identify not only the how, but also the who and the why. According to Illig, the plot was hatched at the highest levels of power in 10th century Europe. He points to a trio of immensely powerful and intelligent men as the lead conspirators. The first was the young and ambitious Holy Roman Emperor, Otto III, who ascended to the throne in the year AD 983. The second was his close friend, tutor, and confidant, Gerbert of Aurillac, a brilliant scholar and clergyman who Otto would eventually install as Pope Sylvester II. The third, a necessary partner to ensure the conspiracy held sway beyond Western Europe, was believed to be the Byzantine Emperor Constantine VII. Illig argues that these 3 men, a Holy Roman Emperor, a Pope, and a Byzantine Emperor, possessed the collective political, religious, and intellectual authority needed to perpetrate such a monumental fraud. But what could possibly motivate them to undertake such a task? The first motive, according to the theory, was one of ultimate religious and millennial ambition. The year AD 1000 was a date of immense symbolic power in medieval Christianity. It was the dawn of a new millennium, a number widely associated with prophecies of the second coming of Christ and the final judgment. Illig's theory proposes that Otto III and Pope Sylvester II were not actually living in the late 900s, but rather in the early 700s. They allegedly conspired to add 297 phantom years to the calendar for one primary reason, so that their own reigns would fall at the dawn of the auspicious year AD 1000. It was an act of supreme ego and piety, an attempt to write themselves into the center of Christian eschatology and preside over what they believed would be a pivotal moment in human history. The second motive was political. It was about creating a past to justify the power of the present. The young Otto III dreamed of restoring the glory of the ancient Roman Empire under his own Christian rule. He called his movement the Renovatio Imperii Romanorum, the renewal of the Roman Empire. But when he looked back through the real history of the 7th and 8th centuries, he would have found a significant gap in an imperial Christian lineage. To solve this problem, Illig claims the conspirators invented a historical figure to fill the void, Charlemagne. Charlemagne, the legendary king of the Franks who was crowned emperor on Christmas Day in the year AD 800, is, in this theory, a complete fabrication, a literary invention, a medieval King Arthur. The year 800 falls conveniently within the 297-year phantom period. By creating the story of Charlemagne, a powerful, pious, and unifying Christian emperor who ruled a vast European empire, Otto III created the perfect heroic predecessor. He gave his own quest to renew the Roman Empire a sense of historical legitimacy and divine destiny. He was not just an ambitious king, he was continuing the noble work of the great Charlemagne. So the conspiracy, as Illig lays it out, is a tale of ambition on an epic scale. It's the story of three powerful men who allegedly hijacked history itself, forging documents, creating legends, and inventing centuries out of thin air. They did it to place themselves at the center of God's millennial plan and to invent a glorious past that would secure their power in the present. This is the who and the why of the phantom time hypothesis. Now, we must examine the how, the evidence they supposedly left behind. At the heart of any great conspiracy theory, there is usually a single, tantalizing piece of evidence, a smoking gun, that seems to unravel the official story. For Heribert Illig and the phantom time hypothesis, that smoking gun is not a forged document or a missing artifact, but an apparent mathematical error hidden in plain sight within the history of our own calendar. To understand this clue, we need to look at the history of how we measure time. For most of Western history, the calendar used was the Julian calendar, established by its namesake, Julius Caesar, in 45 BC. It was a major innovation, creating a system of 365 days with a leap day added every 4 years. This gives an average year length of 365.25 days. The problem is that the true solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to make one full orbit around the Sun, is not exactly 365.25 days long. It's slightly shorter, by about 11 minutes and 14 seconds. This might seem like a tiny, insignificant error, but over long periods, it adds up. For every 128 years that passed, the Julian calendar would drift forward by one full day relative to the seasons. This meant that crucial astronomical events, like the spring equinox, were happening earlier and earlier on the calendar with each passing century. By the 16th century, this calendar creep had become a major problem. The spring equinox, which should have been occurring around March 21st, was now happening on March 11th. For the Catholic Church, this was a serious issue, because the date of Easter, the most important holiday in the Christian faith, is determined by the date of the spring equinox. A drifting equinox meant a drifting Easter, a theological and logistical crisis. In response, Pope Gregory XIII assembled a commission of the best astronomers and mathematicians of the age to create a solution. The result was the Gregorian calendar, the same, more accurate system that we use today. The reform had two parts. First, it adjusted the leap year rule to be more accurate, preventing future drift. But second, and more dramatically, it had to correct for all the drift that had already accumulated over the centuries. To get the calendar back in sync with the sun, Pope Gregory issued a papal bull declaring that 10 days would be dropped from the calendar. And so, in October of 1582, the day after Thursday, October 4th, was not Friday, October 5th. It was Friday, October 15th. 10 days of history were simply erased to fix the clockwork of civilization. It is in this correction that Heribert Illig finds his smoking gun. He asks a simple question: was 10 days the correct number? He argues that if you calculate the accumulated drift from the moment the Julian calendar was instituted in 45 BC up to the Gregorian reform in AD 1582, a period of 1,627 years, the error should have been much larger. With the known drift of 1 day every 128 years, the total accumulated error over that time should have been approximately 12.7 days, which would be rounded to 13 full days. Therefore, Illig claims, Pope Gregory's commission should have skipped 13 days, not 10. This discrepancy of 3 days is the mathematical heart of the phantom time hypothesis. Illig asks, where did those 3 missing days of accumulated drift go? His answer is that the time they represent was never lived. He argues that the 3-day difference corresponds to a period of roughly 300 years that never actually occurred but was artificially inserted into the timeline by the conspirators. This period, from AD 614 to 911, is the phantom time. To its proponents, this is not speculation, it is a cold, hard mathematical anomaly. It's an error in the books that suggests our entire historical ledger has been cooked, and that 300 years of history are nothing more than a ghost. A mathematical anomaly in a centuries-old calendar is a fascinating clue, but a conspiracy that rewrites 300 years of history would need to be propped up by more than just a single calculation. It would require a coordinated effort to forge a physical and written past. According to proponents of the phantom time hypothesis, the evidence of this forgery is all around us, hidden in the supposed gaps and inconsistencies of the historical record from the early Middle Ages. The first argument beyond the calendar is an archaeological one. Heribert Illig and his supporters claim that for the period they identify as phantom time, roughly AD 614 to 911, there is a suspicious and unexplained scarcity of archaeological evidence in many parts of Europe. They argue that while we have a relative abundance of artifacts, burials and building foundations from the Merovingian era that precedes this period, and a wealth of material from the Ettonian era that follows at the intervening 3 centuries are comparatively barren. It's as if, from an archaeological perspective, a whole layer of history is missing from the soil. They contend that the few artifacts that are dated to this period are often misdated, and actually belong to another era. This supposed archaeological gap is mirrored, they claim, in the history of architecture. Proponents of the theory point to the emergence of the Romanesque style in the 10th and 11th centuries. This sophisticated architectural style, with its massive stone vaults, rounded arches, and complex church designs, seems to them to appear too suddenly, without a clear and gradual evolution from the simpler building techniques of the preceding centuries. The Palatine Chapel in Aachen, Germany, the centerpiece of Charlemagne's court and supposedly built around the year 800, is often singled out as a key anomaly. Its complexity and design, they argue, are anachronistic, belonging to a period at least 2 centuries later. To a phantom time theorist, this sudden leap in architectural sophistication is not a sign of rapid innovation, it is a sign that the centuries of slow, gradual development were fabricated, and never actually took place. Beyond physical evidence, the theory's most explosive claim targets the written record. Illig argues that the historical chronicles and documents from this 300-year period are almost entirely forgeries, created in the 10th century and beyond by monks and scribes working under the orders of the conspirators. Their goal was to create a believable, but completely fictional, history to fill the newly invented centuries. And the centerpiece of this entire literary fabrication, the main character in this grand phantom drama, was Charlemagne. As we discussed, the theory posits that Charlemagne, the great king of the Franks and founder of the Holy Roman Empire, never existed. He is a phantom king, a legendary figure created to serve the political ambitions of Otto III. Proponents argue that the story of Charlemagne is simply too perfect, too heroic to be real. The sheer scale of his alleged accomplishments, unifying most of Western Europe, fighting dozens of successful military campaigns, fostering a vibrant cultural and intellectual revival known as the Carolingian Renaissance, and being crowned by the Pope in Rome, seems more like the stuff of epic poetry than sober history. They argue he is a composite character, a larger-than-life hero designed to be the perfect Christian emperor, a role model for his creator, Otto III. The vast body of literature and legal documents from his reign are dismissed as part of the same masterful forgery. When taken together, these claims seem to build a compelling case. A mathematical problem with the calendar, a supposed lack of physical artifacts, a sudden and unexplained leap in architecture, and a legendary emperor whose story seems too good to be true. These are the pillars upon which the phantom time hypothesis rests. It paints a picture of a past that is not as solid as we believe it to be, a timeline riddled with ghosts and forgeries. The case for the phantom time hypothesis, as laid out by Heribert Illig, appears compelling. It presents us with a conspiracy of powerful men, a seemingly logical motive, and a mathematical smoking gun hidden in the most fundamental tool of our civilization, the calendar. But a hypothesis, no matter how clever, must be able to withstand scrutiny. And when we turn the lens of mainstream historical and scientific analysis onto the theory's central claim, the entire foundation begins to crumble. The calendar anomaly, the 3-day discrepancy that serves as the linchpin for the entire theory, is, according to virtually all historians of science and astronomy, based on a single, fatal misunderstanding of the Gregorian reform. The argument seems sound only because it starts its calculation from the wrong historical anchor point. Illig's math is not wrong, but his premise is. To understand why, we must look again at the motivation for the reform in 1582. As we've established, the primary driver was the Catholic Church's urgent need to correct the date of Easter. The formula for calculating Easter Sunday is complex, but it is fundamentally tied to the spring equinox. The rules for this calculation, the ones that the 16th century Church was trying to preserve, were not established in the time of Julius Caesar. They were formally codified centuries later, at a pivotal moment in Christian history, the First Council of Nicaea, held in the year AD 325. This council, convened by the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, brought together bishops from across Christendom to establish a unified church doctrine. One of their most important decisions was to standardize the calculation of Easter. As part of this, they formally recognized the date of the spring equinox as March 21st, the date on which it fell during that period. This is the crucial detail that the phantom time hypothesis ignores. When Pope Gregory XIII set out to reform the calendar over 1200 years later, his goal was not to reset the clock to the year 45 BC. His objective was to restore the spring equinox to its proper place of March 21st. To bring the calendar back into alignment with the state it was in during the Council of Nicaea, the very council that had defined the rules he was trying to uphold. So, the calculation for the accumulated drift should not start in 45 BC. It should start in AD 325. Let's do the correct math. The period from the Council of Nicaea in AD 325 to the Gregorian reform in AD 1582 is a span of 1,257 years. If we use the same known drift rate of the Julian calendar, one full day for every 128 years, the calculation becomes simple. 1,257 years divided by 128 gives us an accumulated drift of 9.82 days. That number, 9.82, when rounded to the nearest whole number, is 10. Exactly 10 days. The precise number of days that Pope Gregory's commission ordered to be skipped. There is no 3-day discrepancy. There is no mathematical anomaly. The calculation is perfect. The actions of the 16th century reformers make complete and total sense once their actual historical goal is understood. They were not correcting for the entire history of the Julian calendar, only for the drift that had occurred since the Nicene Council had set the rules for Easter. With this simple historical fact, the central pillar of the phantom time hypothesis collapses. The smoking gun turns out to be a misfire, based on a flawed assumption about the reformers' intentions. But if the calendar evidence is invalid, what about the other claims? What about the supposed gaps in the archaeological record and the phantom king, Charlemagne? We must now turn our attention to the rest of the world to see if it, too, was a part of this grand deception. With its central pillar of the calendar anomaly now collapsed, the phantom time hypothesis stands on shaky ground. But what of its other claims, the supposed gaps in archaeology and the phantom king, Charlemagne? To investigate these, we must broaden our view beyond the borders of medieval Europe. A conspiracy to add 300 years to the calendar could not have happened in a vacuum. It would have required a global deception of impossible complexity. When we call the rest of the world to the witness stand, the hypothesis doesn't just falter, it evaporates completely. The most glaring flaw in the phantom time hypothesis is that it is profoundly Eurocentric. It focuses almost exclusively on the history of the Holy Roman Empire and the papacy, while conveniently ignoring the vibrant, well-documented civilizations that were flourishing elsewhere in the world during the so-called phantom years of AD 614 to 911. During this exact period, the Islamic world was experiencing its golden age. The rise of Islam in the 7th century led to the establishment of vast and powerful caliphates that stretched from Spain to India. This era saw incredible advances in science, mathematics, medicine, and philosophy. The cities of Baghdad, Damascus, and Cordoba were bustling centers of learning and culture. This period is meticulously documented in thousands upon thousands of surviving texts, from historical chronicles and administrative records to scientific papers and biographies. Crucially, these Islamic histories do not exist in isolation. They frequently record diplomatic, trade, and military interactions with their neighbors, including the Byzantine Empire and the Frankish kingdoms of Europe. For the phantom time hypothesis to be true, it would mean that every one of these Islamic scholars and historians was either part of the same conspiracy as the Pope in Rome or that their entire rich history is also a fabrication. The proposition is absurd. Half a world away, another great civilization provides an ironclad alibi for the missing years. The Tang dynasty in China, which ruled from AD 618 to 907, falls almost perfectly within the phantom time window. This era is considered a high point in Chinese civilization, known for its poetry, its art, its stable government, and its detailed court records. The Tang dynasty's history is continuous and well documented, and like the Islamic caliphates, it records interactions with the outside world, including trade along the Silk Road. For the theory to hold, one would have to believe that the 10th century European conspirators somehow coordinated their 300-year forgery with the imperial court scribes of Tang dynasty China, a civilization with which they had almost no direct contact. The logistical impossibility of this is staggering. If the testimony of world history isn't enough, the hard sciences deliver the final, definitive blows. The field of astronomy provides a precise and unforgeable clock. We can retroactively calculate the exact time and location of past celestial events like solar eclipses. Historical records from Europe, China, and the Arab world all document sightings of major solar eclipses during the supposed phantom years. These historical sightings match our modern astronomical calculations perfectly. If 300 years of time had been artificially inserted into the calendar, these historical records would be wildly out of sync with our calculations. They are not. Furthermore, we have an unbroken record of sightings of Halley's Comet, which returns to our skies approximately every 76 years. Sightings of the comet recorded by astronomers in China and elsewhere during the phantom period line up perfectly with its known orbital path. Finally, there is the physical evidence of dendrochronology, or tree-ring dating. By analyzing the unique growth ring patterns of ancient wood, scientists have created a continuous, year-by-year timeline stretching back thousands of years. This tree-ring record flows seamlessly through the 7th, 8th, and 9th centuries, showing no evidence whatsoever of a missing 300-year gap. The trees, the stars, and the histories of civilizations across the globe all tell the same story. The years Heribert Illig claims are a phantom were very, very real. We have arrived at the end of our investigation. We opened this hypothesis file to explore a truly radical claim, that 300 years of our shared history were a complete fabrication. We examined the core of the theory, a supposed mathematical anomaly in the Gregorian calendar reform. We looked at the supporting claims of missing archaeology and a phantom king, Charlemagne. And then, we held those claims up to the vast, collected knowledge of history and science. The verdict is now clear. The central pillar of the phantom time hypothesis, the calendar discrepancy, is based on a fundamental error, a misunderstanding of the historical motivations behind the 1582 reform. The secondary claims of missing artifacts and architectural leaps are not supported by the wider archaeological community, which sees a clear and gradual evolution of cultures and styles throughout the early Middle Ages. The figure of Charlemagne, while certainly legendary, is supported by a wealth of contemporary evidence that historians have painstakingly authenticated. But the most damning evidence against the theory comes from a simple refusal to look beyond the borders of Europe. The hypothesis is fatally wounded by its own Eurocentrism. For the theory to be true, it would require a conspiracy of impossible scale. It would mean that the meticulous historians of the Islamic Golden Age and the court scribes of Tang Dynasty China were, without any logical motive, in perfect collusion with a 10th century Holy Roman Emperor. It would mean that the very stars in the sky and the trees on the ground were willing participants in the deception, as their records in astronomy and dendrochronology show no evidence of the missing time. The phantom time hypothesis serves as a perfect case study in the anatomy of a conspiracy theory. It begins with a seemingly clever and esoteric piece of secret knowledge, the calendar calculation, that makes the believer feel as though they have stumbled upon a truth that mainstream experts have missed. It then builds an elaborate narrative around this single point, connecting unrelated dots to form a grand, overarching plot. But to maintain this belief, one must engage in the theory's most critical feature, the dismissal of all contradictory evidence. To believe in phantom time, you must believe that countless historical documents are forgeries, that entire civilizations falsified their records in perfect sync, and that the fundamental laws of physics and biology are lying to us. The conspiracy becomes so large and all-encompassing that it collapses under its own weight. So, is it possible we are living in the wrong century? The evidence overwhelmingly says no. The phantom time hypothesis is an intellectually stimulating and deeply imaginative thought experiment. It challenges us to question our assumptions and to ask how we truly know what we know about the past. But as a credible historical theory, it fails on every front. The early Middle Ages, with all of their complexity and change, did happen. Charlemagne was a real and profoundly influential ruler. And the year on our calendar, while the product of a long and fascinating history of human error and correction, is, in the end, correct. The file on this hypothesis is now closed. If you want to explore more of history's most fascinating theories, subscribe to the Archivist and click the bell so you never miss a file.